Hi, I'm Shane, and I'm going to be doing some painting today. I was looking for my paints and my art supplies, which I had trouble finding. But I did come across this, which is, I think, the last thing that I had started maybe 8 years ago and never finished. I don't remember drawing this. And it's kind of just in the drawing phase now. So I thought, well, why not go ahead and finish that? So that's what I'm going to do now. Pick up right where I left off about 8 years ago. I think my original intention for this painting was to make it a sun. I'll start by drawing some more sunbeams. As I mentioned, I had a little trouble finding my old art supplies, and when I shifted over to doing all my work on a computer, which is in my house, the studio space where I used to paint gradually became this catch-all and turned into storage. So it's piled up with totes and boxes and Christmas decorations, things like that. I'll be cleaning that space and using it again soon, but for now, I've commandeered one of my kids' bedrooms. They're both away at college right now. I found a student art set that I purchased years ago. My wife and I would buy things like this when they were on sale to have on hand to give as gifts, and this one was never used. So for this painting and video, I'll be using it until I can clean out my old painting studio. I'll give my thoughts on this paint set at the end of the video. I usually paint with acrylic. I like that it dries relatively quickly compared to oil, and I can thin it out and sort of use it like watercolors. When I put my paint on the palette, I generally stick to primary colors with a black and a white. I do use other colors, but I can get most of what I need from those primary colors and just mix from them. My usual choices are cadmium red medium, cadmium yellow medium, cerulean blue, ivory black, and titanium white. Now those particular primary colors weren't in this art set, so I picked ones that looked close to those. I tend to paint in thin layers, putting one color on top of another. Now there are several ways to mix colors, either by blending them on the palette, blending them on the painting itself, or painting two colors next to each other so that it visually blends. And I do all of those, but I also like to mix my colors by putting one down, letting it dry, and then layering another color over it in a thin wash. For instance, I can put down a base layer of a blue, and then when it dries, put a thin layer of yellow over it to make a green. By mixing my paints using different methods like that, I find that it adds variety in the painting itself, which I really like. On this painting, you notice I put down a layer of white first on those sunbeams, and afterward, when it dried, I overlaid some oranges and yellow. And when you use a white underneath a thin layer of a color like yellow, it really makes that yellow shine. But if you were to mix the white with the yellow, you would wind up with like an opaque creamy color. What I'm going for here is the translucence of the yellow wash to allow the white to shine through, and it makes those sunbeams brighter. I like to paint on 1/4-inch birch plywood or untempered masonite. After they've been gessoed and sanded, they're really smooth. The birch plywood is lightweight and lacks the wood grain that you would find in regular plywood. Plus, you can buy it at home improvement stores in small panels rather than having to buy a big 4-foot by 8-foot sheet. So it's easy to get home if you don't own a truck. I prefer the smooth surface over a bumpy surface like canvas because I always like to draw on my paintings, and it's hard to get very detailed with a pencil on canvas because of the texture. That's not to say I've never used canvas, because I have. I just don't use it very often. I will occasionally use paper. I try to get like a heavier watercolor paper. You can tape it down and then prime it with gesso so that the paint won't bleed through. Although that puddling bleeding effect, like you would get with watercolor, can work in some paintings, so I just make it case by case. Most of my paintings are pretty stylized, and they often have a somewhat cartoony feel to them, and I rarely go for realism. Even when I do, I like to include stylized elements to add variety. Most of my paintings have a drawing quality to them because I use my liner brush quite a lot, even in my large paintings, which tends to take a long time. I like to have a mixture of broad strokes and fine lines. I also draw into the painting before and after with a pencil or with ink. I often allow the under drawings to show through the thinner layers of paint in some places because I like how that looks. I like for my paintings to have a nice variety of elements, throwing in little details, patterns, and even doodles, and partnering that sort of stuff with just simple blocks of color. I like to see variety in the brush strokes and how the paint is applied. There's so much that you can do in a painting to make it interesting for viewers, from the colors you choose to your subject matter to the way you put the paint on the surface. You can make some parts really detailed and other parts that seem almost unfinished. You could even incorporate photos or collage elements if you want, and I've done that before. I've decided to turn this into a flower instead of a sun. I'm just going to add a stem. I often do this while I'm painting. I'll get an urge to change something into something else. This particular paint brand hasn't worked that great for me, so I don't anticipate them being my normal paints. Although I like the carrying case they're in, so they'll be good if I travel or for doing some sketchbook work. So I will be getting some use out of them. I think we can call this one finished. Okay, so here we go. Not the best work I've ever done, but it was a nice start getting back into the swing of things, getting painting again. Coming back to it after all these years, it felt pretty natural. I do want to talk about the materials though, because I was experiencing some frustration with the paint. So as I mentioned earlier, I was using this paint set, and it's a beginning level art set. Purchased it at Hobby Lobby several years ago. One of the problems I had with it is that the paint, it didn't want to blend well, it didn't want to mix well, it didn't cover that great, it didn't move that great. Many years ago, I taught art classes at like a community center, and I taught adults and children, and we had paints there that were donated to us so that if we had a student that come in that didn't have their own art supplies, they would have something to use during the class. And I remember now that it was that kind of paint. I remembered it when I smelled it because it has a really distinct kind of a plastic smell. They just weren't as good of a quality of paint. Now, if this is what you can afford and you're just getting started, you can certainly, make a painting with them. I just did. If you had, say, an art set like this, you could buy maybe a tube of a better brand every couple of weeks or so. Really, you don't need a whole lot of colors. My palette is usually primary colors and a black and a white. A good red, a good yellow, a good blue, black and white. And I would highly recommend that you do that as you're learning. Just use those primary colors and then mix other colors from those, and you're going to learn a whole lot about painting and color mixing and doing that. So that's all for now. Thank you.